I'm 53 years old, and I still remember the day my daughter Sarah told me she wouldn't raise a child like that. It was in a hospital in a cold room with fluorescent lights flickering above my head. My granddaughter had just been born. Perfect, tiny, 10 fingers, 10 little toes, and a heart beating so strong for such a fragile body. The doctors had said she had Down syndrome. And Sarah? She turned to me with completely dry eyes, completely empty of emotion, and said those words that would never leave my head again. "Dad, I'm not going to raise a child like this. I've already decided. The papers are already being prepared. She's going up for adoption. It's done. There's nothing you can do about it." I remember breathing. Just breathing. Because the moment she said that, something inside me died. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hate. It was a sadness so deep that I felt my chest collapse. My daughter, the one I raised with my sweat, with my work, with everything I had, my daughter had just given up on a human being, on a child, on her own daughter. I left that hospital without knowing where I was going. I remember being in the parking lot with my car keys in my hand, but I couldn't get in. I just stood there, staring at nothing, at everything. The sun hitting my face, and I thought it was strange to feel so hot on such a dark day. I took out my phone and called my wife, Ruth. I told her everything. She cried. I didn't cry, I just became empty. Ruth and I tried to talk to Sarah. I begged. I literally played the role of a grown man in his 50s, begging his daughter to acknowledge his granddaughter. But Sarah had closed the door. She and her husband, that kind of guy I always thought was weird, decided that this was the best choice. And she made it very clear, if we supported the child, she would cut us out of her life, completely. We would never see her again. Never see my older grandchildren again. Never. So I did what any desperate father would do. I accepted that ultimatum. I let my daughter leave. I let that child disappear into the adoption papers, and I pretended to everyone that everything was fine. Ruth practically didn't sleep for weeks. I would go to work, come home, eat food that had no taste, sleep in a room that felt like a tomb. Life continued. Life is like that, you know. It doesn't stop for you. It runs you over and keeps going. But deep inside, I had a question that wouldn't leave me. Who was that girl? Where was she? Was she okay? Did she have someone who loved her? Because I knew, deep down in my soul, that that child deserved love, deserved to be searched for, deserved to have someone fighting for her. So, 3 months later, I took my car and went to the adoption agency. I didn't tell Ruth, I just went. I sat across from a woman named Linda who worked there, and I asked her to tell me everything she could about the adoption. She looked at me with that pitying look I would come to know well in the years ahead. She told me that for legal reasons, she couldn't give me information about the child or the adoptive parents. It was confidential information, closed, forbidden. I left there with a name, just a name. On the registration paper, Isabella. My granddaughter's name was Isabella. I had a name. I didn't have anything else, but I had a name. That night, I started a journey that would consume me for the next 17 years. I opened a red-covered notebook, I still have that notebook at home, and wrote down everything I knew. Date of birth, March 15th, 2006. Time, 2:47 p.m. Weight, 2.8 kilos. Length, 48 centimeters. Eyes blue, hair dark blonde. And that was it. That was all I had of my granddaughter. That was everything I had to hold on to. I started doing things that were probably crazy. I hired a private investigator with my savings. I didn't have much. I was a manager at a building materials store, not rich, but I paid what I could. The guy charged me a fortune and told me that without specific information about the adoptive parents, it would be almost impossible to locate her. Almost impossible. That word stayed with me. Ruth knew what I was doing. She didn't like it, but she understood. We had long conversations at night, lying in bed in the dark, and she would say, "It's not healthy, honey. We need to accept this." And I would say, "I can't," and she would just hold my hand, because Ruth is like that. She doesn't always agree, but she's there. I started attending support groups. Fathers who had lost children, grandparents who had lost grandchildren, people who knew the hole that loss is when you don't die from it. There I found other people searching. Men my age, women older than me, people who had spent decades looking for a child. A woman named Margaret told me she had searched for her daughter for 23 years before finding her. 23. She looked me in the eyes and said, "Never give up. Never." And I promised I wouldn't. I spent the first years basically obsessed. I had an album at home with pictures I pulled from the internet, images of children with Down syndrome, children in schools, children at events. I analyzed every face. Was that Isabella? Was she there, in that place, in that moment, and I just wasn't seeing it? It was depressing, it was insane, but it was all I had. My daughter Sarah continued her life as if nothing had happened. I saw her at family events, weddings, funerals, and she pretended I didn't exist, or worse, she treated me with that coldness that only those completely sure of themselves can manage, as if she had all the right in the world, as if that child had been a problem solved instead of a life that had disappeared. I stopped confronting her after a few years. It wasn't worth it. She had chosen her path. I had chosen mine. The years passed. They really did pass. Isabella was 5 years old, then 10, then 15. She was somewhere living her life, and I was here, searching for her, nothing changing. My hair got grayer, my body started to hurt. Ruth and I aged together in this wait. And sometimes I would wake up at night thinking, what if she doesn't want to be found? What if she's happy where she is, and my appearance will just mess everything up? But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. In 2015, 9 years after I started that crazy search, the internet changed everything. Social media exploded. Suddenly, there were specific groups of adopted people looking for biological families. There were entire websites dedicated to reunions. There was hope where there had only been darkness before. I created profiles on every platform that existed. I might have looked like a crazy grandfather, because honestly, that's what I was. But I put everything out there. Pictures of me, the story, a request, anything that could reach Isabella. Nothing happened, weeks, months, nothing, but I kept going. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You keep going, you don't give up. You wake up every day with that tiny hope that today is the day. Today is the day you find her. At 62 years old, at 17 years of searching, I was almost ready to accept that I would never find Isabella. Ruth had started talking more seriously about stopping. My body was tired. My heart was tired. I knew I was aging in that search, that I was spending the years I had left on something that might be impossible. Then, on a random Tuesday, my phone rings. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said to pick up, and I did. "Hi, sir." "Sir?" A woman's voice, uncertain, trembling a little. "My name is Isabella. I think you're looking for me." I couldn't breathe, literally couldn't. The entire room turned grey, my lungs froze. Ruth was cooking in the kitchen and heard my silence. She came running. "Are you okay?" Isabella on the other end of the line. My granddaughter was talking to me. I'm here, was all I could say. "I'm here. I saw your profile on the internet last week," she continued, her voice more confident now. "My adoptive mother raised me alone. My adoptive father left her when I was 7 years old. He didn't accept my condition. So it was just her and me. The two of us against the world." Isabella paused. "She told me about you weeks ago. She said you had been looking for me, that you sent messages to the adoption agency every week for years, that you never gave up." I cried. First cry in 17 years. Ruth held my hand. "I wish I had looked for you sooner," Isabella said, "but I was afraid of disappointing you, afraid of you rejecting me like my adoptive father did, or like my grandmother did." She knew. My granddaughter knew exactly what had happened. But my mom said, "For 17 years, your grandfather has been looking for you. Not everyone does that. Not everyone loves like that." So I looked at the profile again, and I decided it was time. We set up a meeting at a cafe on a Monday. I didn't sleep all night. I sat in the kitchen with Ruth, drinking coffee that got cold, looking at pictures of Isabella that she had posted on social media, pictures I had seen thousands of times. But now they had a face, a real name, a real story. She was beautiful. She had my eyes. She had something of my daughter Sarah too, but in a different way. Better. Sweeter. The next day, I drove to that cafe like a man in a trance. Ruth came with me, but she would wait in the car. It wasn't for her to do this. It was just my moment with Isabella. I walked into the cafe, and the first thing I saw was a 17-year-old girl sitting at a corner table, looking at the door, waiting. She had blue eyes, dark blonde hair. She was nervous, her fingers drumming on the table, but when she saw me, she smiled. I froze, simply froze. "Grandpa," she said, and stood up. I crossed that cafe like I was in a dream, and when I got close to her, I just hugged her. 17 years of waiting, 17 years of sleepless nights, 17 years of searching, all condensed into a hug that lasted forever and no time at all. Isabella cried. I cried. A woman nearby took a picture with her phone, something I would hate to know happened later because it was shared on social media. But in that moment, I didn't care. The whole world could be watching. It didn't matter. "I'm sorry it took so long," Isabella whispered to me. "I'm sorry it took so long." "No, my love," I said. "You're here. You're here, and that's all that matters." We talked for 3 hours in that cafe. Isabella told me about her life, about her adoptive mother, who was an art teacher, who had raised her daughter with complete devotion, who had taught Isabella that being different wasn't being less, it was being special, that there was an entire community of people like her, and that she was loved, deeply loved. Isabella told me about school, about friends, about the difficult moments when she realized she was different, that other children looked at her in strange ways, but about how her mother always lifted her up. "You are a light," her mother used to say, "and if people don't see it, that's their problem, not yours." I listened to everything and felt my heart break and repair itself at the same time. "Your biological mother, my daughter," I said carefully. "She made a choice I will never understand. But your adoptive mother's choice, to love you, to fight for you, to raise you as a strong and beautiful woman, that choice changed everything. You are not the result of what your grandmother did. You are the result of what your mother did, of what she chose." Isabella held my hand. "I want to meet your wife, my grandmother Ruth. Was she in the car?" I smiled. "She is." When Isabella opened the car door and saw Ruth, the first thing that happened was another hug. And in that hug, 17 years of waiting and sadness began to transform into something new, something called family, something called redemption. Ruth looked at me over Isabella's shoulder and simply smiled. We were finally home. But that was just the beginning of the real story, the real transformation. Over the next few months, Isabella became a constant part of our lives. Every weekend, she would come to our house. Ruth would cook, her famous lasagna, her rice and beans, all the comfort food that fills a home with love. Isabella would sit at our kitchen table and tell us stories about her school, where she was in a special education program but was thriving, about her friends who loved her completely, about her dreams, which were big and beautiful and full of hope, But there was something else I noticed about Isabella. Behind that smile, behind that light her mother had talked about, there was a quiet strength, a resilience that most 17-year-olds don't have. She had spent her entire life being told she was less than, being looked at with pity, being underestimated, and somehow she had refused to believe it. One Sunday, when it was just Isabella and me in the living room, Ruth had gone to the store, Isabella asked me something that I wasn't prepared for. "Grandpa, do you think she'll ever want to meet me, my biological mother?" My chest tightened. Sarah. We hadn't talked about Sarah in months. Not really. The family knew that Isabella had been found, but Sarah had made it very clear that she wanted nothing to do with it. She had refused to come to any family gathering where Isabella was present. She had, in many ways, doubled down on her original choice. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said honestly. "I hope so. But that's something only she can decide." "I don't want her to feel obligated," Isabella said quietly. I just wanted her to know that I'm okay, that I turned out okay, that her choice, even though it hurt, didn't break me." I felt something shift inside me in that moment. This girl, this beautiful, resilient girl, had the capacity to forgive, to understand, to see her biological mother not as a villain, but as a broken person who had made a broken choice. Isabella had more grace in her little finger than most people have in their entire lives. The truth is, life doesn't always work out the way you hope. Sarah never reached out. She continued her life, continued to pretend that none of this had happened. At family events, she would literally walk to the other side of the room if Isabella appeared. It was painful to watch. It was painful for Ruth, and I know it hurt Isabella, even though she tried to hide it. But here's what I learned in those months after finding Isabella. Sometimes the redemption isn't about fixing everything. Sometimes it's about salvaging what you can, about building something beautiful from the ruins of what was broken. With Isabella in our lives, Ruth and I felt young again. We had purpose. We had joy. Every dinner became an occasion. Every conversation felt important. Isabella started calling us every day, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She would text us memes that made no sense. She would send us pictures of things she was doing. She was making us part of her life, not as an obligation, but as a choice. And that choice meant everything. One day, about 6 months after we met, Isabella came to our house with her mother. Ruth and I had only met her in passing at the cafe that day, but now we sat together in our living room, and I understood everything. I understood how this woman had raised Isabella with such love and intention. I understood how she had fought for her daughter in a world that often doesn't fight for children who are different. I understood that this woman was a hero in a way that most people will never be. "Thank you," Isabella's mother said to me, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for never stopping. Thank you for loving her even when you didn't know her." "Thank you for raising her," I said back. "Thank you for showing her what unconditional love looks like." We cried together. Ruth held my hand. Isabella sat between us, and for the first time in 17 years, I felt like the weight I had been carrying my entire adult life was finally getting lighter. But the most important moment came later that year, during the Christmas holiday. Sarah came to our house. She still did on Christmas Eve, though it was becoming increasingly tense. Ruth had invited her specifically because we had something to tell her, something we wanted her to see. When Sarah walked in, Isabella was in the kitchen with Ruth, helping prepare dinner. Sarah froze when she saw her. For the first time in all those months, mother and daughter were in the same room since that hospital bed 17 years ago. I watched Sarah's face. I saw the conflict there. I saw the part of her that wanted to turn around and leave. But I also saw something else. I saw fear. I saw the face of a woman who had made a choice she couldn't undo, and who was terrified of what that choice had cost her. "Hello, Sarah," Isabella said, in a voice so calm and so kind that it broke my heart all over again. I'm Isabella. I know you're my biological mother. I just wanted you to know that I'm doing well, really well. I have a mother who loves me, a grandfather who never gave up on me, a grandmother who makes the best lasagna I've ever had. She smiled. I'm okay. I'm happy. You don't have to feel guilty. You don't have to be scared. I just wanted you to know that I turned out okay. Sarah couldn't speak. She just stared at Isabella like she was looking at a ghost, like she was looking at a version of her own life that she had tried to erase, and it was standing right in front of her, beautiful and real and forgiving. I don't hate you, Isabella continued. I'm not angry at you. I just wanted to meet you, and now I have. At Christmas Eve, Sarah didn't leave early. She stayed through dinner. She didn't talk much, but she listened. She listened to Isabella talk about her life, her dreams, her friends, and I could see something changing in her face. Not forgiveness, exactly, but recognition. Recognition that the choice she had made 17 years ago had real consequences, and that those consequences had become a real person who was extraordinary. I don't know if Sarah will ever fully accept what happened. I don't know if she will ever be the mother that Isabella deserves. But that night, something shifted. That night, the wall that Sarah had built around herself for 17 years developed a crack. And sometimes that's all you need, just a crack, just enough light to come through. As for me, I spent the rest of my days with Isabella in my life. The obsession that had consumed me for 17 years transformed into something else, into peace, into the knowledge that some searches do end, some prayers do get answered, some loves do find their way home, even if it takes 17 years and a desperate old man with a red notebook to make it happen. Because that's what I learned. Love doesn't give up. Love doesn't stop. Love waits 17 years in the dark if that's what it takes. And when love finally finds what it's been searching for, it transforms everything. It transforms the searcher. It transforms the found. It transforms the whole world around them. That's the only truth I know for certain. That's the only thing that matters in the end. Years passed after that Christmas Eve, and life took on a rhythm I never thought I would experience again. Isabella was now 19 years old, a young woman with dreams bigger than the small town we lived in. She had enrolled in college, studying early childhood education, because she wanted to work with children who had special needs. She wanted to be for other children what her mother had been for her, a light, a fighter, a believer. Ruth and I became her biggest supporters. We would attend her college events, cheer at her presentations, listen to her talk about her classes and her plans for the future. And Isabella, in turn, became our reason for getting out of bed in the morning. At my age, you understand that time is precious. You understand that the moments you have with the people you love are finite. So we didn't waste a single one. My daughter Sarah was a different story altogether. After that Christmas Eve, when Isabella had shown her such grace, something had shifted in Sarah, but it wasn't a complete transformation. Sarah was still cold, still distant, still carrying the weight of a choice she couldn't undo. But she came to family events now. She didn't leave the room when Isabella entered, and sometimes, very occasionally, I would catch her watching Isabella with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe. Or maybe it was something deeper than that. Maybe it was the recognition of what she had lost and what she could never get back. One day, about 2 years after we had found Isabella, Sarah asked to speak with me privately. We sat in my office at the building materials store where I still worked, even in my 60s. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, and I remember thinking that this conversation had been coming for a long time. I owe you an apology, Sarah said, and I could see she was struggling with the words. I owe Isabella an apology. I owe everyone an apology. What I did, what I chose to do, it was wrong. I can see that now. I can see it every time I look at her. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I just let her speak. I was young and scared, Sarah continued. I had just gotten married to a man I thought I loved, and when Isabella was born and the doctors told me about her condition, I panicked. I let him convince me that this was the right choice, that raising a child with special needs would ruin our lives, that we weren't equipped for it. She paused, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. He left me anyway. 5 years later, he left me for someone else. And I realized that all of it, all of my fear, all of my choices, they were based on nothing. They were based on a lie he told me, and a lie I told myself. Sarah, I said gently, you can't change the past, but you can accept it, and you can try to be better moving forward. I know, she said, but Isabella, she deserves more than an apology from me. She deserves a mother, and I don't know if I can be that for her. I don't know if I've hurt her too much. You should ask her, I said. You should be honest with her about what you're feeling. That's all anyone can ask. Sarah didn't do it right away, but about a month later, she reached out to Isabella and asked to have coffee with her. Just the two of them. I don't know exactly what was said in that conversation. Isabella respected Sarah's privacy and didn't tell me every detail. But I know it mattered. I know it opened a door that had been locked for a very long time. From that point on, Sarah and Isabella began building a relationship. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy. There were difficult conversations and moments of tension, but it was real, and it was, in its own way, a kind of healing. I watched this transformation happen, and I understood something profound. I understood that redemption doesn't just happen to one person. It radiates outward. It affects everyone it touches. Sarah was being redeemed, not just in her relationship with Isabella, but in herself. She was becoming the mother she should have been all along. Not because Isabella demanded it, but because Isabella had shown her what it looked like to forgive, to move forward, to choose love over fear. Ruth saw it too. One night, lying in bed, she said to me, "You know, I'm proud of Sarah. For the first time since all of this started, I'm actually proud of her." "Me too," I said. "She's learning." It's never too late to learn, but the real turning point came when Isabella made an announcement that shocked us all. She had decided to start a foundation dedicated to supporting families who had children with special needs, to providing resources, education, and emotional support to parents who were facing the same fears that Sarah had faced, the same doubts, the same uncertainty about whether they could handle raising a child who was different. "I want to help people," Isabella told us, her eyes bright with purpose. "I want to help parents understand that having a child with special needs isn't a tragedy. It's a gift. It's an opportunity to learn what unconditional love really means. It's an opportunity to raise a child who will teach you more about strength and resilience and joy than you ever thought possible." I cried when she told us this. Not sad tears, tears of pride. Tears of understanding that my 17-year search hadn't just brought Isabella back into my life. It had set off a chain reaction of healing that would affect hundreds of other families. Sarah became one of the Foundation's biggest supporters. She volunteered her time, she shared her story, the full, honest, painful story of her choice and her regret. And in doing so, she became a voice for parents who were struggling with the same fears. She became a cautionary tale and a redemption story all wrapped into one. One day, about 5 years after we found Isabella, we held the Foundation's first annual gala. It was a black tie event, held in the nicest hotel in the city. Isabella was the keynote speaker. She stood on that stage, beautiful and confident, and she told our story. She told the story of her biological grandfather, who had searched for 17 years. She told the story of her biological mother who had made a choice in fear and had spent years learning to live with that choice. She told the story of her adoptive mother who had loved her without condition and without hesitation. And then she looked directly at me in the audience and she said, "But most importantly, I want to tell the story of what it means to never give up." My grandfather didn't know if he would ever find me. He had no guarantee that his search would lead anywhere, but he searched anyway, because that's what love does. Love doesn't require certainty. Love doesn't require a guarantee of success. Love just shows up, day after day, year after year, and it keeps searching. It keeps hoping. It keeps believing. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it finds what it's been looking for. The entire room was crying. I was crying. Ruth was crying. Sarah was crying, sitting next to me, her hand on my arm. That night, after the gala, Isabella came back to our house. She took off her heels and sat on the couch between Ruth and me, and she said something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "Thank you, Grandpa," she said. "Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for loving me before you even knew me. You taught me something really important. You taught me that love is a choice. It's not about blood. It's not about biology. It's about choosing to show up for someone again and again, even when it's hard. Even when you don't know if it will work out. Even when it takes 17 years. I held her hand, and I understood that my search was finally truly complete. Not because I had found Isabella, though I had, but because I had learned what it meant to love unconditionally. I had learned that sometimes the greatest acts of love don't come with immediate rewards. Sometimes they come 17 years later. Sometimes they come in the form of a phone call from a girl you've never met. Sometimes they come as a simple conversation in a cafe. And sometimes, if you're blessed, they come as a life transformed by the knowledge that you matter, that your love matters, that your refusal to give up matters. I was approaching the end of my life now. I didn't know it then, but I would pass away 3 years after that gala, and I had no regrets. Every sleepless night, every obsessive search, every moment of pain and uncertainty had been worth it, because it had led me here. To this moment, to this girl who was living her life with purpose and passion and light. The years after that gala were the best years of my life. I know that might sound strange for a man in his late 60s, approaching 70, but it's true. Every single day felt precious. Every conversation with Isabella felt like a gift. Ruth and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm with her, and she had become as much a part of our daily lives as breathing. Isabella finished college and started her work with the foundation full-time. She was incredible at it. She had this gift, this ability to make people feel seen and understood. Parents who came to her with guilt and shame found forgiveness. Families who felt isolated found community. Children with special needs found advocates who believed in them unconditionally. Sarah, my daughter, had also transformed. She had left her marriage, the one that had driven so many of the decisions that led to Isabella's adoption in the first place, and had rebuilt her life. She spent a lot of time volunteering with the foundation, and while she and Isabella would never have the relationship that a biological mother and daughter typically have, they had something else. They had respect. They had understanding. They had the knowledge that they were both doing the best they could with the choices they had made. One evening, when Isabella was 23 years old, she came to Ruth and me with news. She was getting married to a wonderful man named Michael, who loved her completely and who understood everything about her history and her journey. Michael had met her at the foundation, where he had been volunteering as a counselor. He had seen Isabella's light and had been drawn to it immediately. Ruth and I were thrilled. We started planning the wedding like it was the most important event in the world, because for us it was. Every detail mattered. We wanted Isabella to feel like a princess. We wanted this day to be perfect. But something happened in the months leading up to the wedding that none of us had anticipated. Sarah asked to speak with Isabella privately, and when they came out of that conversation, both of them had been crying, but not from sadness, from something else entirely. Sarah told Isabella that she wanted to walk her down the aisle, not as a biological mother claiming a right, but as a woman who had learned to love her daughter, despite the years of distance and pain. She wanted to stand beside Isabella on the most important day of her life and show the world that they had moved beyond the tragedy of their past into something new, something real. Isabella said yes, and I remember thinking in that moment that this was the real redemption. This wasn't about me finding Isabella. This was about a broken family finding its way back together through grace and forgiveness and the stubborn refusal to let the past define the future. The wedding was beautiful. It was held in a garden, surrounded by flowers and sunlight, and everyone who had been part of Isabella's journey was there. Her adoptive mother, who had raised her with such love, Ruth and I, who had searched for her and loved her from afar, Sarah, who had come to understand the cost of her choices and had spent years trying to make amends. When Sarah and Isabella walked down the aisle together, I felt something inside me shift. It was like watching a circle finally close, like watching a broken story finally find its ending, like watching redemption take physical form. Isabella looked at Michael at the end of that aisle, and I saw in her eyes the same light that her adoptive mother had always talked about, the same light that had carried her through a life of being underestimated and dismissed, the same light that had made her capable of forgiving people who had hurt her. I held Ruth's hand as they exchanged vows, and I cried. Happy tears, grateful tears. Tears from a man who had spent 17 years searching for his granddaughter and had found so much more than he was looking for. He had found redemption. He had found purpose. He had found the knowledge that love really does conquer all, even if it takes time, even if it takes patience, even if it takes a willingness to never, ever give up. After the wedding, Isabella and Michael moved to a new city where they started their own chapter. They would visit Ruth and me regularly, and each visit felt like a celebration, a reminder that we had been blessed in ways we didn't deserve. I passed away 3 years after Isabella's wedding. Ruth was there with me at the end, holding my hand just like she had held it through all those years of searching and waiting. And one of the last things I said to her was, "We found her. We actually found her." "Yes, we did," Ruth said, smiling through her tears, "and she found us too." Isabella came to my funeral, of course. She spoke about me to the gathered crowd. She talked about a grandfather who had loved her so much that he had been willing to spend 17 years searching for her. She talked about what that kind of unconditional love had taught her about the world, about the importance of never giving up on people, about the power of showing up for someone, even when you don't know if it will make a difference. "My grandfather taught me," Isabella said, standing at my grave, "that love isn't measured in years. It's not measured in proximity or in biology. It's measured in choice, in the decision to keep showing up, to keep hoping, to keep believing that the person you love is worth fighting for." He spent 17 years fighting for me. And because he did, because he never gave up, I learned that I was worth fighting for. I learned that I mattered. I learned that my life had value. She paused, and I could see tears streaming down her face. "Grandpa, wherever you are, I want you to know that your search changed more than just my life. It changed the lives of hundreds of families through the foundation. It taught my biological mother what it meant to love unconditionally. It showed the world that redemption is possible, that broken things can be repaired, that family isn't just about blood, it's about the choice to love someone, no matter what." Ruth was stronger than I ever was. After I died, she continued the work that Isabella and I had started. She became even more involved with the foundation. She became a grandmother figure to the children whose parents came seeking help. And she lived for another 8 years after I passed, watching as the foundation grew and changed the lives of thousands of people. But the most important legacy wasn't the foundation, though that was important. The most important legacy was the simple truth that Isabella had learned, and that she spent the rest of her life teaching to others, that love doesn't give up, that love shows up day after day, even in the darkness, that love searches for 17 years, if that's what it takes, and that when love finally finds what it's been looking for, it transforms everything. That's the story I leave behind. Not a story about a man who searched for his granddaughter, but a story about a man who loved so completely that he changed the trajectory of his entire family, that he healed wounds that seemed unhealable, that he showed his daughter what forgiveness looked like, that he taught his granddaughter that she was worth fighting for. And in doing all of that, he found the redemption he didn't know he was searching for. Because sometimes, when you love someone that much, you find more than just the person you're looking for. You find yourself. You find peace. You find meaning. You find the reason why you were put on this earth in the first place. That's what 17 years of searching taught me. And that's what I hope you take away from this story, that love is worth the wait, that faith is worth the struggle, that redemption is always possible no matter how broken things seem. Never give up, never stop searching, never stop believing that the person you love is worth fighting for, because they are, and so are you.